Bible Kids!
Hello children, our lesson today is taken from Exodus 13 and 14 and it deals with Moses and the crossing of the Red Sea. Years ago, in the land of Egypt, fantastic monuments were built by the kings, known as pharaohs, using the labour of thousands of slaves. These slaves were God's chosen people, the children of Israel. The Egyptians were cruel to their slaves. They beat them to make them work harder. The Israelites prayed that God would deliver them from this hard life, and God, hearing their prayers, prepared to take them out of the land of Egypt into the land of Canaan. First of all, God chose a leader for his people, a man by the name of Moses. Moses was a man who the Lord could trust and who trusted in the Lord. Moses was to be used by God to deliver his people from the power of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Moses appeared before the king and boldly began telling him what God had planned for the children of Israel. God wanted Pharaoh to let his people go. At first, the king was scornful of Moses. God? Who was God to tell him what to do? After all, he was the great Pharaoh of Egypt. Moses warned Pharaoh that unless the children of Israel were set free, God would send great plagues upon the land of Egypt. But Pharaoh refused to listen. On one occasion, the Lord turned all the water in the land to blood. The air was filled with the stench of dead fish, and there was no water to drink anywhere. But Pharaoh refused to let the people go. Another time, God caused the land of Egypt to be overrun with frogs. Frogs in the street, frogs in the houses, frogs in their beds, frogs everywhere. But Pharaoh's heart was as hard as before. On another occasion, flies were sent by millions to torment the Egyptians, and still the king would not give up. God sent 9 plagues, but still Pharaoh refused to let the people go. Finally, God sent one more plague. It was when the angel of death passed over and killed the firstborn of all Egypt. The king had had enough. He called for Moses and told him to take the children of Israel and get out of Egypt and stay out. That was a happy day for the children of Israel. They were free at last. God had heard their prayers. For 430 years, these people and their parents before them had been in the land of Egypt, many of those years as slaves. Now they gathered up their belongings and were ready to go. Soon they were following Moses out into the desert. A hot, hard journey was ahead, but the people were happy. They were heading for a new life and the land of plenty. What a sight they were! A whole nation of people, hundreds of thousands of them, with their cattle and all their belongings, strung out across the desert. One day something happened that caused a murmur of fear to run down the column of people. They pointed and they whispered. What had they seen? A huge cloud had appeared before them, and such a cloud they had never seen before. The people stood still in wonder. Then Moses said to the people, "Don't be afraid. The Lord God himself is appearing as a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. We know that the Lord is with us and is leading the way." Up until now, the Israelites had been headed directly to the land of Canaan, and if they went on that way, they would soon come into the land of the Philistines, and that would mean just one thing: war. The Lord knew that if his people had to go into battle, they'd become discouraged and want to return to Egypt. So God spoke to Moses and told him to change his direction of travel. The Lord wanted them to turn south towards the Red Sea. Moses may not have understood why, but he trusted in the Lord and gave the order to turn towards the Red Sea. The people did not understand either, but they did what their leader had told them to do. Pharaoh had spies watching, and of course they were ready to report every move the children of Israel made. When the spies told Pharaoh that the Israelites were changing their direction of travel, the king got out his maps and began to study the situation. Pharaoh was already sorry that he had freed all those slaves that had served him so long, and now they were walking right into a trap. Soon they would find themselves with no place to go. There would be mountains on each side, and in front of them would be the Red Sea. If Pharaoh brought his armies in from the rear, well, he could catch them and take them back. And so Pharaoh commanded the armies of Egypt to move out across the desert and travel as fast as they could. The Egyptians raised up quite a lot of dust, and when the Israelites saw the dust clouds far in the distance, they knew right away what that meant. The Egyptians were coming after them. The people of Israel were afraid, and they were angry with Moses for having brought them out into the wilderness. They forgot that God was with them. The children of Israel cried out to Moses that they would have rather have stayed in Egypt as slaves than to be slain out here in the desert by the Egyptian army. But Moses wasn't upset. He was perfectly calm, and he said, "Fear not, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord." Then something strange happened. Pharaoh's soldiers saw it too. They saw a great dark cloud moving in between their camp and the camp of Israel. On the side of the Egyptians, the cloud made everything so dark that they thought they'd better wait until morning to recapture their slaves. But on the other side of the cloud it was different. To the children of Israel, it was a pillar of fire. They could see everything clearly, and the light showed that they were trapped, hemmed in by the mountains and the Red Sea. Any minute the Egyptians would come riding down on them, and there was no place to go. Why had God allowed this terrible thing to happen to them? As the people watched, Moses, their leader, walked right up to the edge of the Red Sea. Then Moses did something that God had told him to do. He lifted up his rod, and a strong wind began to blow, and the waters began to part. Before long, the wind had cleared a path right through the middle of the sea, and though the children of Israel were frightened, they followed their leader in between those huge walls of water. All night long, the children of Israel marched through the sea on the path that the Lord had made for them. Finally, the last person arrived safely on the other side. Pharaoh was told that somehow the Israelites were getting away. He shouted the orders to catch them at once. In no time at all, the entire Egyptian army was chasing after them, and they followed the Israelites right into the passage prepared in the Red Sea. Just about then, the Lord caused all sorts of things to happen. The wheels came off the chariots. There was confusion and panic in the ranks of the Egyptian armies. Pharaoh's soldiers were terrified. "The Lord is fighting against us," they said. "Let's turn back before it's too late." but it was already too late. God told Moses to stretch out his rod over the sea, and the chariots, the horsemen, and all the host of Pharaoh were covered. Not one of them escaped. So it was that all of the Pharaoh's armies were destroyed in the midst of the Red Sea, because they acted against the will of God. Moses and the people sang a song of praise and gave thanks to God for the miraculous way he had delivered them from their enemies. The story of the Red Sea doesn't belong just to the past. It has a message for today. The Bible tells us that it took the power of God to deliver Israel from slavery, and it takes the power of God today to deliver people from sin.